Okay, Yom Rishon, Heinte Sonntag. It's your Aleph Tammuz. Tonight and tomorrow and Tuesday night is Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, which is the Chag HaGeula of the Friedrich Rebbe. 91 years ago, Tzaddik Aleph. He passed away. He was released from prison in Tafresh Pei Zayin in 1927, and now is Taf Shin Ayin Ches, 2018, which is 9 years less than 100 from the time that the Friedrich Rebbe was released from prison, Tafresh Pei Zayin. The Friedrich Rebbe made from his Geula something which was negea to all Yidden. Right? The Friedrich Rebbe himself made from his Geula something which was negea to all Yidden. We all know the famous words which the Friedrich Rebbe wrote in a letter which he gave out for the first anniversary, for the first yahrzeit of his release from prison. He was released from prison in 1927, Tafresh Pei Zayin. And he spent that summer in the suburb of Moscow, called Malachavka, in somebody's home, thinking. I don't know how to describe it. Because first of all, we don't know what he was doing, but from the little bit that we understand, that Rebbe was taking stock. And of course, the end of that story was that he made the decision to leave Russia altogether. Last year, I heard a story which I'd never heard before, and I unfortunately forgot from who I heard it. This is the kind of story that's very important to go to the source. That they found by Rabbi Jacobson, Saul Jacobson was already in America then, letters, or a letter from, or a telegram from Yankel Juravitzer, Yankel Maskalik. And he wrote to Rabbi Jacobson that the Chassidim, the Anash, were putting pressure on the Friedrich Rebbe to leave Russia. They were putting pressure on the Friedrich Rebbe to leave Russia. And they told the Rebbe, the KGB told the Friedrich Rebbe, you shouldn't think you got out of our clutches. We're going to get you again. And the Chassidim were very aware of it. And the Rebbe reluctantly, the way I understood the story, reluctantly agreed Russia, but there was at night. He had choivis. And I forgot if it was $10,000 or it was $25,000. But you're talking now 1927, it was an enormous amount of money. Yankel Juravitzer sent a telegram out of Shabbos to New York saying that Jacobson must immediately wire that entire sum of money. You saw Jacobson didn't have 2 nickels, he didn't have 2 nickels. The train cost 2 cents, you understand? And wire it immediately, because then the Rebbe will agree to leave the country. And by Monday the money was wired. Where Jacobson got that money from, nobody knows. I'm sure he borrowed it. Yidden, Anash. What the Rebbe called Geza Anash. I told you once that I saw in Rabbi Jacobson's Sefer. Rabbi Saul Jacobson Sefer called the Korn of Bnei Yisrael. He went into the Rebbe in 1958, which is this year, 60 years ago, on the occasion of the 50th, then it was the 50th yahrzeit since he had been by the Rebbe Rashab the first time. So when into Yechidus, the Rebbe told him he should write Zechrenis. So he told it, that means his memoirs, his recollections. He says he doesn't have an organization. There was a Jew, just write them down. Anything comes to your mind, write it. The organization will be done later. And his grandchildren published a book called Zikaron Bnei Yisrael. It's a very, very important sefer, which has been arranged chronologically. It's a biography, it's an autobiography, but there's so much history of Lubavitch in this sefer. And he was one of the most important Lubavitch Chassidim in America. I mean, bar none. Rabbi Saul Jacobson was one of the most important Lubavitch Chassidim in America. Really, he was. You know, even before the Hatch brothers, the generation who helped the Rebbe Kvayochel. To establish Lubavitch in America, there was Jacobson, there was Kazanovsky. These are the very, very important Lubavitch Chassidim who made things happen in America. And so the Friedrich Rebbe once said to Rabbi Saul Jacobson that there's 3 kinds of Chassidim. There are Chassidi Ageze, Chassidi Hanusach, and Chassidi Chabad. Chassidi Ageze means people who come from Chassidim. They weren't even from necessarily, but they identified with Chabad, Chassidi Ageze. Then there's Chassidi Hanusach, that means they're pushing the people, but they daven from the Alter Rebbe's Nusach. And then there's Chassidi Chabad who actually learn Chassidus and are Isaac and Avodah Pnimis. So a lot of the people who helped the Friedrich Rebbe were not Chassidi Chabad, they were not even Chassidi Hanusach, they were pushing Chassidi Ageze. They came from Geza Nash, lived in America. Some of them made a lot of money. I told you also many times that the Rebbe said once, I heard these words from the Rebbe in my own ears. Remember, I was standing right here. But the Rebbe Gezak, these are the words precisely, Denoy. The Rebbe said, Geschicht Yidden in America, there's on Poshet Machan Asach Geld, Ad Kam L'Shem HaKadosh, word for word. The Rebbe should send Jews to America, they should simply make a lot of money. Those are the Rebbe's words. And that money saved the Jewish people after all the tzaddas. And some of that money was wired in 1927, that summer, to Russia. And once the Rebbe was able to pay off his debts, he agreed to leave. And he left. When it came the first anniversary, thank you. When it came the first anniversary of the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was not in Russia anymore. He was already in a very different world. Personally, he was in a much safer place, although the Rebbe, you're talking about a Rebbe, he never left Russia. He was always in Russia. So he wrote a letter. It's a famous letter, and it's printed with the Kuntris of Yud Beis Tammuz that came out that year, Tafel H. Peches, which this year is like 90 years exactly. And in it there's a short maimer, which is called Asada Sheyesh Beis Kimateda. We've learned this maimer, we've talked about this maimer, we've fabrenged about this maimer, Asada Sheyesh Beis Kimateda. And in that Kuntis is also a letter, in which the Frierdiker Rebbe writes the famous words, as Rebbe used to repeat over and over again, Loi oisi bilvad gol HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Yud Beis Tammuz. Not only I did Hashem release, redeem, liberate on Yud Beis Tammuz, Elokol Mechabe Ve'Teiro Mitzvah, all those who love Teiro Mitzvah, Ad Asher B'Shem Yisrael Yichuna. Even and continuing till such Jews that the word Yisrael, the word Jew, is by them a kinui, a nickname, a secondary accolade, meaning to say, from the best of Jews to the worst of Jews, I shouldn't say the worst, from the Jews who are the highest to the Jews who are the lowest. The Eibishter released all of them in the Beis Tammuz. And the Rebbe announced a Yom Tif, a Chag, in the Beis Gimel Tammuz. And the whole Jewish world embraced it. Chassidim and Misnagdim, Mistam Sfadim also. Because the Rebbe had defied Stalin. And everybody knew it. The ganze Welt hat das gewusst. And I always say this, and maybe it's terrible to say, maybe it's wrong. My hergish is, when you read the letters, and when you read the story, and you hear the story, the impression that you get, that when the Frierdiker Rebbe walked out of the Spalerka prison, he walked out alive from that prison. The person who was most shocked was the Rebbe himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not have a exit strategy. He didn't think but cloud about himself. He didn't think for 1 second about himself. This was a Mesiras Nefesh without any cheshbonis whatsoever. And the Eibishter made a nest. And the Rebbe didn't help him. The Rebbe didn't make the Eibishter. The Rebbe made it impossible for the Eibishter to make a nest. When you read about the Rebbe's arrest, there are parts of it that are so painful. They're so upsetting. They're so unbelievably upsetting. Yeah. One of the stories, which I was talking to somebody in Shul, and it was just hitting me. The Frierdiker Rebbe undertook, when he went into prison, his shtel was that they're nothing. You're going into the shackles, into the clutches. They were not even called KGB, they were called the NKVD, the NKVD. And to take an approach, they're nothing. To be in their house. And we know how they valued and respected human life. And his shell was, they're nothing. And it's upsetting. It's so upsetting. Why? Because they beat him. Makas Retzach. They beat him with a stick, not once or twice, dozens of times. Just because of the defiance. He was like a kid in the second grade who was not going to listen to his teacher. He was not going to listen. And he wouldn't, and they couldn't break him. They broke his body. It's a mazik, it's a bile. They hit him so many times, and they hit him so many times, so violently. What for? What for? Because they don't exist. What would happen if the Rebbe would just acknowledge that he's a prisoner? What would have happened? What would have happened if the Frierdiker Rebbe would say, okay, I'm in jail. He himself said, the Guf is in Golos. The Neshama is not in Golos. They asked him to stand up. And I told this to you so many times. They asked him to stand up, what for? They asked him to stand up to give him a Psuda Teva that he's free to leave the prison. And he won't stand. And they tell him that in the prison, when a prisoner is the specific information he has to stand. We'll hit you. So he hit me. So they beat it until the Goyim couldn't hit him anymore. And then they came back later and told him again to stand up. They hit him again. And then so they couldn't hit him anymore. They couldn't hit him anymore. So they called him into the office. So he called him to the office and he had to walk from his cell to the office like Yoinstein. He was standing up and they told him he's free to go. That part of the story, and we don't know the whole story. He was there 18 days. We know the first couple of days, which he wrote in detail, and you read about those beatings. And then the rest of it, we have added little pieces. We only know the story from the Friedrich Rebbe. There are no eyewitness accounts, right? Lulov and Nachmanson, the KGB version of the story is not public, at least not yet, at least as far as I know. So you just have the Rebbe's stories. The first, he started to write the Shimas HaMais, and mamish hour by hour. And he wrote hundreds of pages describing every little detail. But he finishes after the second day, mamish, into the second day. So the rest of it, you have stories that he would tell on occasion, but you never have such a precise, accurate depiction of events as they unfolded. They must have hit him 20 times. I told this to you before that I knew a Yid who has now recently passed away, a very sweet Jew, wonderful Jew. His name was Rabbi Tzvi Gnivald from Yerushalayim. He just passed away after Pesach. So I asked him, he was a Yerushalmi Mishpocha, Jerusalemite family, how he came to Lubavitch. So he explained to me that his father was a Polish Yid from Poland, this is before the war, who had successfully moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he at a very young age, as a teenager, in his early 20s, had started a business of import-export. Jews in Eretz Yisrael were very poor. Jews in Europe were also very poor. But Jews in Eretz Yisrael were especially poor. And he had panos, and he did well. And he got married, and he had a family, and he mamish had a good life in Yiddish, in the Holy Land, Yerushalayim. And he looks out the window, and he sees the Friedrich Rebbe walking. This is 1929, when the Rebbe visited Eretz Yisrael before he came to America. And with the Friedrich Rebbe as an entourage, there's a group of people walking around him. Come moving. It's so strange. There's not a single picture of the Friedrich Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, not one. And there could have been so many. But they didn't take pictures in those days. The Frume Yidden didn't take pictures. It's a shot. It's a big, big shot. There's not a single photo. The Rebbe wasn't all the way in Sakdeshim, with the case of Ravi, with Moshe Machpeler, with Vaidashbi. There's not one photo. And he also met Gedele Yisrael. That you had that. There's not one picture. A kid said, and along with the entourage is a man walking, holding a chair. And suddenly the Rebbe stops, and the man with the chair comes forward, and the Rebbe sits. What happened? The Rebbe couldn't walk. Now you're talking, this is before the paralysis, and before the multiple sclerosis, and before the other illnesses that the Rebbe suffered from. This is 1929. The Rebbe couldn't walk. When he was finished with Shpalerka prison, they broke his body until he was broken permanently. Permanently. He never recovered. And it was how do you say this? It was his own fault. He decided, the Rebbe Rayatz made a decision that there's nothing. Finish, nothing. So if nothing hits you, how do you react to nothing? And they hit him so many times. When you read the Meiser, it's just so upset. As upsetting as it is to you, it actually happened to a living human being. This is a story. We're telling stories. It's a Meiser shehoya kachoya. Okay, I won't do it anymore. Is it enough? Is it enough? So this Gnivald sees the Rebbe sitting, and he's sitting, and he's sitting, and he's sitting, and after sitting for a few minutes, he thinks to himself, to get into this Rebbe is going to be a line who knows how long. But he's sitting on the street corner with 5-6 people. I'll run over and ask for a bracha. So he runs downstairs from his apartment. He runs over to the Friedrich Rebbe, and he probably put out his hand. He says, my name is Kach Kach, and I want a bracha from the Rebbe. So I don't know how the whole conversation went, but the bottom line is the Rebbe told him, what do you need a bracha for? You're healthy, you're married, you have children, and you have panasa. What do you need a bracha for? So he says to the Rebbe, I want a bracha that all of my children should be your chesidim. This is what he told the Friedrich Rebbe. I don't know how seriously he appreciated what that means. So the Rebbe said, are you sure? Are you sure that that's what you want? All of your children were chesidim? He says, what I want. So the Rebbe gave him a bracha, and every single one of the children was a Lubavitcher. At a time that in Yerushalayim, Kerach HaNoira of Yerushalayim was a big interference with the whole union of Chassidus, let alone Chassidus Chabad. But that's the Matthias, that's the story. Anyway, so the Rebbe made an announcement the following year that the Yibis Tammuz is the reason every Jew. Now the Havana Shabbat, how the Friedrich is going out of jail, releases every Jew as an Inyan Pnimi, obviously. It's not an actual thing. The Rebbe left behind his chassidim, many of whom over the next decade and a half would be killed in Stalin's. You know, the Gulag, they would shoot them, push it against the wall. But there's an inyan pnimi, there's a certain durchbrach, a spiritual breaking of a barrier, opening up of a possibility which had to do with the Frierdiker Rebbe's release from prison on Yud Beis Tammuz. Anyway, this is all tomorrow. This is a Shalom Aleichem to a Shia, yeah? We're learning Tanya today. So I'm starting off by first mention tomorrow and Tuesday will be Beis Tammuz, and we're bringing this from tomorrow, we're bringing about Yud Beis Tammuz. Tomorrow I'm going to learn with you on Maimed also. Today I'm learning on Maimed. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about Yud Beis Tammuz. Now we're learning Tanya. We're learning Tanya, okay? We haven't learned Tanya in a while for all kinds of reasons. Because of different times. And we're still holding in Pei Gimel. Holding in the end of Pei Gimel. So if you have a book handy, I want to read a few words just to make it a real Shia. In a Shia you learn Teda. So we're the last 10 lines, Be'erech. 9 lines. From the end of Pei Gimel, the bottom of the page. It's page 14. And it says V'hadas. I already gave you one shir on Das. I already gave you one shir on Das. This is my second shir on Das, and I think we've exhausted Pei Gimel. We've wrung it out. I think I've given you 20 classes. Pei Gimel is one of the smallest broken in Tanya, and I stretched it out. 20 classes is a minimum of 5 months. How do you pull that off? Leave it to me. I'm an expert at snail learning, as it were. But in Mitzvah Hashem next time, we'll start B'li Neder, Perek Dal. In other words, we're actually finished this very, very involved discussion about Koiches and Chushim that I shared with you over many, many weeks. We're talking about Das, right? So let's first read the words and translate. We'll read and translate the Shtik Eleh. We did it last time, which was, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And then we're going to have a discussion. V'hadas, the third of the 3 koiches, the third of 3 tools, faculties associated with the mind is das. And what is das? It's reminiscent of the biblical allusion, the biblical reference, the Torah reference, that when Adam and Chava got married, the term that the Torah uses to describe their union is yediyah, to know. So the Alter Rebbe says, what does marriage have to do with knowing? It says the Rebbe, it means to tie together and to join. In other words, the truth of a relationship between a man and a woman is it's a psychological, it's a spiritual thing. It's a bond of a mind and a heart and a soul. 2 people become one person. The term that used to denote this is the word yediyah, because yediyah means to connect. It means to connect with your mind, but connecting with your mind should not be misconstrued as being connected at arm's distance. Faket, it's a very deep thing. And the Rebbe explained, Shemekashe daite, one ties his das. Bekesher amitz v'chozok miyoid, with a knot that is amitz, strong, with perseverance, and very strong. V'yitkan, he plants. Machshavtei, his thought. Bechezek, with a strength, with a hardness. Begedula Saint Sei Baruch Hu, in the greatness of the Ein Seif, of the Eibishter. Ve'enei Mashiach daite, does not allow his mind to wander. In other words, there is what happens through das, and there's how you do das. There's the proactivity of das, and then there's the reward for das. Like anything else, right? What happens in Chochmah? What happens in Chochmah is you surrender your mind to not knowing, right? You admit that you don't know. You have information. Information is frustrating. It's not adequate. You don't understand something. So Chochmah is an act of his batlos, of admitting that I don't know. And of course the reward for that is a flash. The flash is new information, new insight, creative new information that comes from the nefesh, it comes from the subconscious, which is the basis for new understanding. So what do you do in Chochmah and what do you get in Chochmah? What you do in Chochmah is mevatel yisrael. What you get in Chochmah is in enlightenment. So the same is true in Bina. There's what you do and what you get. And the same is true in Das. There's what you do and what you get. What do? You persevere. You take your brain with information that he already has. He's already collected it. He understands it. And he focuses on it. And the focus on it is not because he wants to understand it better, or there's something wrong with his understanding. He understands it perfectly, understands it precisely, understands it thoroughly. So why are you wasting your time rethinking something that you already know? And the answer, of course, is because the Moyach Hadas is not about understanding. The Moyach Hadas is about personalizing. That the information that I have should be information that I need. Things that I understand are things that I care about. You know the story with my boy was walking home with me from shul. So he asked me if cigarettes are a drug. My 10-year-old. He's getting his education on the street and on the school bus and in the classroom. You do before, yeah. Cigarettes, a drug. So I said to him, cigarettes are not a drug. Because a drug means some things that alters your condition. It changes the way your brain works. But in cigarette there's something called nicotine. And nicotine is addictive. And I explained to him the difference between a drug and an addiction. They're two different things. Sometimes they come together, but the drug is something that alters your state of consciousness and awareness and mood. And an addictive substance doesn't change your mood, but you have a craving that you become sick if you don't have it, and that's why it's a dangerous thing. So he says to me, he says, "Oh, my 10-year-old boy, not to the Friedrich Rebbe." So this is the Hakdama. What is the Friedrich Rebbe? The Friedrich Rebbe was a chain smoker, the Pashtus. Chain smoker. You could see the pictures. The secretary, Chaim Lieberman, would take a dish, a plate, and lay out the cigarettes in a circle. It was like a pattern, yeah? Lay out the cigarette circle. How many, if you have a dish, a 9-inch dish, how many cigarettes can you lay in a circle? More than a pack. A pack of cigarettes didn't cost $8. It costed 8 cents in those days. There were no taxes and money. And he would lay them 2 or 3 high. You talk about 80, 90 cigarettes. Yeah? And the Rebbe would light a cigarette from a cigarette. This was in 1946 and 47 and 48. But all of his illnesses, he smoked like a chimney. And he's visited by, the Rebbe was so sick, he was such a sick physically. And he's visited by a doctor. And the doctor sees the cigarettes on the table. He says to the Rebbe, "You smoke?" He says, "Of course I smoke. Everybody smoked in those days." He says, "The Surgeon General just determined that cigarette smoke is dangerous for your health. In case you don't understand it, I just want you to know that in the 19th century, if you had asthma, the medical cure for asthma was to smoke cigars. In other words, how much, smoke cigars. Cigars is much worse than cigarettes. It's mamish poison. And the solution, a person has a problem with his breathing, the answer is to smoke cigars. Think about it. So in 1948, they discovered that smoking cigarettes is not good for the heart, it's not good for the lungs, it's not good for anything. So, okay, over here. A minute later, the doctor pulls out a cigarette. Secondhand smoke would not appear on the scene for another 50 years. And he lights up a cigarette, and he offers the Rebbe a cigarette. The Rebbe was a chain smoker. So the Rebbe says, "I don't smoke." So he says to him, "What do you mean you don't smoke? You're a chain smoker." He says, "You told me it's not to my health." And that day, the Rebbe wrote a letter. Saying that until 20, you're not allowed to smoke. And after 20, he's asking that people shouldn't smoke. And they say that the Rebbe and were also heavy smokers. I'm sorry?
I missed the last few words.
That the Rebbe and Rabbi Mentek stopped smoking cold turkey. The Rebbe wrote a letter asking that people should stop smoking, and they pushed it, stopped. I heard from people that the Rebbe's room, the Rebbe's cheder, was a fog. You walked into the Rebbe's room, it was so thick with smoke. And the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe wrote a letter that he's saying, asking that he didn't, when the doctor told him that cigarette smoking is dangerous, and by a Rebbe everything is ruchnis. It wasn't like he was inspired from the science. If this is what medicine is saying, this is what the Eibishter is saying. That's how a Rebbe looks at healing Bechlal. But Rabbi, the Shus Nitma Reifel Nippas comes from the Eibishter. So he wrote a letter saying that until 20 you're not allowed to smoke, and after 20 he's requesting that you shouldn't smoke. So the Rebbe said it a Fabrengen, the Rebbe, our Rebbe said it a Fabrengen, that Hayesa, the Nossi, Ador, das das nicht, that since the Rebbe, the Nossi doesn't need it, because the doctor said he's not allowed, and he's not allowed, so that means the generation doesn't need it. The Rebbe said this is now 70 years ago. 70 years ago, 60, right? A very, very, very long time ago. Anyway, you can tell a person the cigarette smoke is dangerous to his health. Okay, it's dangerous, he keeps smoking. Like you have the Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Achrei Meis, right? And Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, David Aladdin, after the death of the two sons of Adon Akayid, you should tell them, says Rashi. Marshal, a person comes to a doctor. And the doctor says, I'll take out snake. Don't eat cold food. Because it'll make you sick. So he doesn't listen to the doctor, he eats cold food, and he dies. Another guy comes to the doctor. And the doctor says, I'll take out snake. Don't eat cold food. Shalei tamos kederach shemeis plain. Because if you eat cold food, you will have the opposite of life like he did. Says Rashi, he's Gira Yesim in addition. The second person got a different message than the first person. The first person got a theoretical message. Second person got a mushal case in point. Yeah, a mushal. I always tell you that one of the greatest hypocrisies in the universe is you come to the outside of a hospital, the emergency area, and there are a bunch of people in white coats smoking cigarettes, while in the building they're not allowed to smoke. But to me, it's so ironic. It's such an irony. It's such a funniness. It's such a mushal for the idea that people who understand better than anybody else if something is not good for them, and they do it anyway. They tell you not to smoke, and they smoke themselves. And they get together in knufias, they have smoking breaks. Everyone comes, they stand, and they smoke together outside the hospital. You're walking in with a sick patient, and this is the Baruch Haba, they're smoking cigarettes. It's so interesting. Why? It's a fel das. You know it's not good. Das means that the information you have is personal. So again, there's an act of das, and there's the effect of das. The act of das are these words. Shemekashe daite. I'm reading inside again. He connects, he ties his mind. V'kesher amitz v'chozak made with a knot that is with perseverance and very hard, very strong. V'yitka, and he plants ma'ashavte, his thought, b'chezek, with strength and hardness. B'gdula saints say baruch on the greatness of the Ein Save. Ve'enei masiach daite, he does not allow his mind to wander for an instant. So the act of das is thinking something over. And thinking something over, not to understand it better, not to know it more, not to examine it, its possible weaknesses, but simply to make it relevant. This is the proactivity, it's the action of das. And the schar for das is a hiskashus. The reward is that something which is theoretical, and something which is spiritual, and something which you cannot see with your physical eyes becomes as real and as relevant and as personal as something which you can see with your eyes. The Eibishter, we cannot see. The Gashmis, we cannot see the Eibishter. Now, with the Eibishter, we see the Eibishter everywhere. We do see the Eibishter everywhere. But we don't see the Eibishter in the kind of way where the Eibishter's purpose and message is as real to us as a message you'll get from your accountant, or from your lawyer, or from your doctor, or from your shadchan, or from whatever the case is. Because somehow, if you don't listen to the Eibush, that's not so bad. Yeah? You don't listen to the doctor, it's kach v'kach. You don't listen to your accountant, the Gorgefeller. Depending on how much you relate to the reality of what they're telling you, that's how serious these things are. Because Eibush you cannot see. And for the Eibush to be real, but the Eibishter's words are negayah to you, and the reality of the Eibishter himself touches you, and is relevant to you, and is real to you, like something which you can see with your eyes, requires an effort, a lot of effort, an awful lot of effort. And the effort is called das, hiskashus, to think about alakus. Not to think in a way that enhances the intellect, because thinking in a way that enhances the intellect is called bina, but to think in a way that makes it personal to me. And the Eibishter becomes real. So Alter Rebbe describes it in these words, that you make an effort to focus on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to lock in intellectually in the Eibishter in such a way that you don't let your mind to wander at all, until the Eibishter becomes something which you can relate to in a personal way, in an intimate way, in a real way. What the Eibishter says matters. I told you last time a bunch of stories about Das, but this story I don't think I told you. This is a maise with the Rebbe Rashab. Last time I told the story with the teeth and the fillings. It's an edel maise. It's an edel maise, but it's a meidik maise. The Rebbe Rayatz, the Fiedike Rebbe, I think, I cannot trust my memory anymore. I used to trust my memory. I don't trust him anymore. But what can I do? That's what I got. I think it's in a Fiedike Rebbe, it's in a Shemitz HaSivim. The Fiedike Rebbe was very close to his father, obviously. And he knew his father's schedule, more or less. And his father's schedule, more or less, had certain things that were with a certain frequency. Not more, not less. And one of those things was his visits to the Tziyim, to the oil of the Rebbe Barash and the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek, his father and his grandfather's Tziyim. And one day the Rebbe Rashab went out of oil, out of turn. I think he went twice, maybe even. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says to his father, you have a regular schedule going to the oil. This is not a part of that schedule. Why are you going to the oil Mitamo? He says, I got a letter from a friend of his, the Rebbe Rashab's friend. As much as you can call a person a friend of the Rebbe Rashab. His name was Rabbi Mordechai Belpispalov. He was the Paltiel Rav. He was a very big Rav, he was a very big Gon, he was also a very big Chassid. When they were younger, he was older than the Rebbe Rashab by many years, maybe 6 or 7 years. They were teenagers. The Rebbe Rashab was 14, 15. He was 20, 21, and they would learn together in the Barch. Niglan Chassidus. He was a very Chassidish young man, a very Chassidish Abach, a Chassidish young man, with a great mind. He was a Chadrus of the Rebbe Rashab. And he used to always say, the Mashal, about Basayana. Basayana, they didn't want to mention a bird that's no good, they call it Basayana. Basayana is probably an ostrich. But the Basayana gets blamed for every crime. Yeah? There are animal birds that are parasitic. They're called swifts. I mean, there's a lot of different species. What they do is that they lay eggs in another bird's nest. And the host bird doesn't recognize the difference. They look the same. They even change the coloration to match. Huh? There's many birds. There's a lot of parasitic birds. A cuckoo, a swift also does the same thing. There's many birds of different types that have this parasitic quality. What happens is, when the eggs hatch, the parasite chick is stronger than the host chick. And the nature of birds is that they feed the most aggressive bird. That's the way that's how survival works. So they kill their own children because they're feeding the parasite. They don't know. But the way that marshal goes is, if you have a bird that pants an egg in a nest of chickens. Chickens can't fly. They can jump a few feet. They stand on a low branch. So they all are sitting on the same clutch, and the hen sits on all the birds, all the eggs. They look the same. And then when they hatch, the chicken climbs up on a low branch and it's stuck, and the other bird soars into the sky. So he said, me and the Rebbe, we're Chavrusis, you understand? We were in the same incubator. We sat together in the same Dalaramas, the same incubator. He says, and I was a son of who knows who, so I grew up to be whatever I am. And this was the son of a Rebbe. So he grew up and he soared into the sky and became a Rebbe himself. This is a word from this of Yaakov Mordechai Paltiel. He was the Rav Paltiel. He was a big city, he was a big Rav, he was a big God. And he asked the Rebbe Rashab to do him a favor and go to the oil and ask a favor for him. He needed medicine. He needed the Rebbe to go for the oil. The pratim of what was wrong with the Rebbe himself, basically. This is the story. And the Rebbe Rashab went several times. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was surprised that the Rebbe would change his whole schedule to do a favor for Nangamot. I mean, with all due respect, this was the Rebbe, this was not the Rebbe. So the Rebbe Rashab said, when my Yangamot, my old friend, asked me a favor, I have to do it. Why? He saved me from missing a mincha. That's the whole story. That the Rebbe Rashab once worked very hard. They were two of them together on an Indian for days. It was maybe just kissed him. There was a lot happening, and with the heart of it stark, they didn't sleep for days. And he took a nap in the afternoon, the Rebbe Rashab, and he would have overslept. And he missed mincha. And the mother woke him up. And the Rebbe Rashab was indebted his whole life. Think about that story, huh? How many of us care about the mincha? He was indebted for life. Any favor my friend Yankee Mother will ask me I have to do, he saved me a mincha. Not he saved me from running into a car or from losing $1 million. He saved me a mincha. You understand? That's called das. Now, when the Rebbe recht me nicht, the Rebbe is an atzmi. But in Tanya, the Rebbe describes the koyach hadas and the midas hadas and the pulas hadas. As we just read, you do what you do to develop this connection with the Eibishter, that a mitzvah should be real, and an aveda should be real, and the Eibishter should be real, is through focus. Yeah? Even if you're the smartest guy in the world, and when it comes to Avan Saga, when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to making speeches, which is what I do for a living, I make speeches, I'm a chayim. You can leck in the finger. He describes the Eibush in such real terms, you can touch it. Yeah. But, if there's no effort made to connect one's das through, and he repeats again the same idea. V'yitka machshavtai, by planting his thought b'chezek, with a hardness and with a strength. Ubahasmada, with the consistency and with the diligence. Says the Rebbe, he can be the biggest philosopher in the world, and his relationship with the Eibishter is superficial. Lo yelid b'nafshei, in his soul will not be birth, emerging. Yirah b'amitis, true fear of Hashem, which translates into not doing an Aveda, and true love of Hashem. Love of Hashem, which translates into doing every mitzvah, which is true. Ki dinyaynei shav, these words are really hard. Dinya means a fantasy, and shav means godishvet, umzist, futile. Dinyaynei shav means futile fantasy. In other words, if you understand the Eibishter intellectually, and you don't spend the time personalizing the Eibishter, so all your feelings for the Eibishter are dinyan, which means a fantasy, which doesn't serve you at all. Now, Canaan, the Rebbe finishes, Hadas, Ukiyim, Amidas, Varius, and Das becomes the basis for the support of the emotions. In other words, for a person to have emotions towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the kind of emotions which affect a person in a real way, you have to have Das. Kibuhu Kelel Chesed Gvura, it includes both Chesed and Gvura. This I explained to you last week. Pirish, love and its branches and fear in its branches. So the key, Das, is a very serious thing. And I want you to know that if you see this, there are some very, very choice words for Das. One of the words which is used in Chassidus for Das is Hergish. Hergish. Hergish means a feel. But we don't mean an emotional feel. Emotions, those are feelings, emotions. We mean an intellectual feel, a feel that has to do with care and concern. I'm going to give you a dugma for Hergish. There's one of the most difficult parts of being a sheikhet is shtel nachalef. A sheikhet, before he can be taught how to shecht, has to learn how to prepare the chalef's knife. The chalef of a sheikhet has to be chad v'cholach. Chad v'cholach are two different things. Cholach means smooth, and chad means sharp. Now, if you know the history of chalafim, before they had steel, once upon a time, for metal to be strong, it had to be very thick. If the metal was thin, it would break. If the metal was very thick, it was very easy to have cholak, it was very hard to have chad. It was very easy to have smooth, it was very hard to have sharp. So it's a thick knife. So there's no bumps on the knife, but because it's so thick, it's very sharp. So they would literally have to go back and forth a few times. When they made thinner knives, it became the other way. It was very easy to have chad. It was very easy to have sharp. It was very difficult to have cholak because they get nicked very easy. The combination of chad and cholak is very difficult, and it's a whole science. And there's a famous part of Hasidic history called sakin and milutashim, which, the way I understand it, means knives that were made much thinner because they were made from a better metal. And because of this, it was possible to make it very sharp, and you have to be very careful about cholak, that it shouldn't have any nicks. I remember getting smicha. I was sitting in Rabbi Pekarsky's room, and a boy walked in with a chalaf that he had worked on for 10 hours, and he hands him the chalaf. The Pekarsky says, "Go out." The boy walked out, and so heartlessly, Pekarsky took the knife. Zet. He ruined the knife. He checked it. And then he smashed it 3 times. You know how much work that is? You know how many hours it's going to take to fix it? The poor guy walks back in, and he gives him back the knife and says, "Okay, fix it. Come back when you're finished." That's the program. And the word that is used for the sheikhet's ability to discern the chidud and the chalaka, the sharpness and the smoothness of the knife, is called hergish. He uses his nail, his fingernail. They say in the old days they used to use their tongue. Don't try that at home. But you have to feel it. And if you are a uman and shchita, if you're very good at shchita and you're yirei shamayim, but if you can check your knife and not feel a bump that somebody else will feel, you can't check it. It's called hergish. It's not emotion. It's nothing emotional about it. It's a sensitivity. It's really a depth. It's a depth. In other words, for you to feel a small nick on a knife, that nick has to matter to you. And if it doesn't make such a big deal, you're not going to notice it, because it's very subtle. So there's a connection between your brain and your finger. That's what it is. If you are a truly Yirei Shamayim, a truly Ed L'Chayid, you understand the severity of shechting with a knife which is not kosher. The name is a treifa. It's treif. If the knife is a pogrom, the name is a treifa. Finished. It's exeris hakos. It's halachas of shchita. So you have to care about kosher to feel that nick. And if you don't feel about kosher, there's no way you're going to feel it. Thank you. The reason there's no way you're going to feel it is because it doesn't concern you enough. And that's where you have the famous expression. You all know the expression, you don't know the context. Sheita eine margish. Thank you very much. A fool, a sheita has no hergish. You could be intelligent, you could be a big Talmud Chacham. There are people who are idiots in this world. They exist, I know. Maybe when I look in the mirror, I see them on occasion also. Yeah? A sheita is not unintelligent. A sheita could be a genius. How can you be a genius and be a fool? Because you don't live in the real world. You don't experience life. You don't experience pain. You don't experience joy. You don't experience people. You're not in touch. And a shaita, you can teach him for 100 years. He'll never have a hergish. They'll never give him kabbalah. They'll never let him shech. Never let him shech. Why? Because to shech, you need hergish. In order to have hergish, you, as a trainee, need to understand how serious that nick is. Not just because the Rav is watching you. Because if you're going to shech with this chalaf and there's going to be a nick, you're going to be ma'achal akmon satrit neveil setrefis, which is a terrible, terrible avera. And shchita, by the way, there's no second chance. I don't know if you know this. A sheikhet who is found to give neveil setrefis to people, it is virtually impossible for him to ever shech again. There's no second, there's no tshuva, don't help. Finish, because we don't know what's going on in his heart. There is one way, which is brought in Shulchan Aruch, that allows a sheikhet who's been displaced, the shech dibar, whatever the word is for a shechita, to get his license for shechita back, and it's practically almost impossible. He loses his career, it's panas. But the beginning of it is hergish. He has to be earnest. A sheikhet has to be a yirei shamayim. It's not a game. And the word that's used is hergish. It's not an emotion. It's a sensitivity. Something as small as a nick on a knife bothers me so much. I'll say, these 10 chickens, take them off the line. There's something wrong with my challah. And the balabas screams at you. What do you mean? It's costing me money. I'm a sheikhet. Made a mistake. This is life. You understand? And what if it's not chickens? What if it's 10 behemoths? Think about the cost, the loss. And Yirei Shamayim is not allowed to make it into a tofel, and it begins with hergish. The feel along the knife. The word they use for that is hergish. It's not an emotional word at all. Just like feeling a nick on a chalaf is not an emotion. It's a sensitivity. The word that's used for das is hergish. The sense to feel the earnestness of a mitzvah and to feel the earnestness of an aveil. You tell stories about the aveil. Someone told me a story the other day, and I don't remember the Pratei HaSipur. I'm sorry. Years ago, I heard a story. I would eat it up and I would process it and give it back the way I heard it. I'm better than most at repeating a story without embellishing it. But I heard this recently. The Teichen HaSipur was that someone was talking about a chassid by the name of Reb Zalman Meisher. Zalmeshe Yitzchak, Avram Hayah's father. When he passed away, the Rebbe wrote on his letter that he wrote to the Mishpacha for Nichem Avelin, Zatzal, Zechreni Tzadik Lebracha. A chassid. So somebody was talking about Yishmael Zalman Meisher. So the details are unimportant, but somebody asked, what's so special with Zalmeshe Yishmael? So he gave him an illustration. And I forgot the illustration. That there's a cat. I think it's a cat. Yeah, don't get nervous. Don't listen. Put yours. I'll tell you when you listen. Yeah, don't listen. And there's a man standing with an axe. Yeah, and the cat comes through a door, and the man is about to hit the cat. The fear, the terror that cat experiences. That's how Rav Zalman Meisher is afraid of an aveil. That was the tear. Nu, versteh azazah. Yeah, what's the name of me? I keep Shabbos. He keeps Shabbos. I put on Philippus. What's the difference? What's the big difference? It's a different universe. And the foundation for this kind of Yirei Shamayim is Das. So the term that's used in Chassidus, Maimonides Chassidus, the sugya of Das is a separate entity. You have Me'ila Mishpatim, you have the sugya of Das, Kisek Neve Divri. But in Chassidus, there's 4 Maimorim, the Rebbe Rashab and Henshchete, which begins with Vayechi. Vanina Sati L'Chashchem Machat 4. It's a very, very thorough and orderly presentation of Das in one place, like a sugya of and it's probably based on the Middle Rebbe's Maimorim, where he goes through different madregas of Das. the first level of das, the lowest level of das, they use the word hergish. Hergish means you give me information and the information is personal to me. You can tell two people the exact same thing and one is so moved and the other isn't moved at all. Not because he didn't understand, but because there's a cotton. He's immature. He doesn't have any depth. There's no emes. And when you see people who have das, I think back in my life, I have seen such people. I grew up in the 70s. There were Bali Tshuva around that I don't see them anymore. A lot of them didn't live very long. Who had such depth. They weren't smarter. They were deeper. You know, I'll give you a dugma for Yid who lived almost till 100. Remember Bachman at Gishtar with the Paltiel Tzaddik? Remember, what was his first name?
Tanya?
No, his father. Remember, he lived on Crown Street. You remember, what was it? Remember Bachman? You know Bachman. He never stopped doing tshuva. He didn't graduate. He didn't become an FFB. I grew up with him, and he's been in Lubavitch since I'm a kid. He lived till almost 100. At the end of his life, he had severe dementia. He would forget where he is. But he davened. You never saw it. The dementia only made him... His whole material avot, he had a siddur with notes and stickers. He was a very intelligent man. He wasn't a poshut that he wasn't that he was educated and he was a professional and he did something in the field of science. He was a very smart guy. But with his he was in Lubavitch for 30 years, for 40 years. He passed away in the last 5 years. He was a real chassid. We were kids in yeshiva. One of Mashpiyim, one told us, you want to learn how to daven, you have to look at the chassid shigim. The chassid shigim of the Bali Tshuva. He never stopped being about tshuva. And I remember as a child, with people, you weren't smart, but whatever you told them touched them more deeply, because they were deeper people. You can't buy that in a store. You could be a genius. You have an IQ of 140, but tennis nicht kaufen. This is das. Das. It's a muhuzach. It's a substantive thing that's to do with character to a great extent. And again, the terminology that's applied is hergish. To feel. And I don't mean to feel with your heart, I mean to feel with your body, the earnestness of a mitzvah. You remember him. I mean, you're women, and I watched him daven. It was such a delight to see such a special, a sincere yid. Everything was so emes. And he never graduated. A lot of our children hang around us FFBs, and we rooted for them. Why? The Rebbe made them from, the Rebbe was a shtick emes, and we're a bunch of shekhem, so you take it. So it's very hard. It's not fair. Yeah, the Rebbe brought the Bali Tshuva into our world. What do you want from us? I should be a tzaddik? I'm not a tzaddik. I'm a behemoth. Okay, you don't want to hear this speech, right? You're enjoying it, but you don't want to hear it anyway. It's then a person becomes from, they give the whole life of the Eibishter. And then they look around and say, what's going on here? What did you pay? I gave everything away. And it becomes very hard to say, so you have your problems, but I'm not going to have your problems. It's very hard to do. You're 25, 26, 27, you look at your chaverim and chavetes, and you gave your whole life away for a Shabbos, for a kosher, for a mikveh, for a film. And so there's a certain person who never changes. Yeah. So bleibt am allem derselbe. Rabbi Pape, I said, you want das, yeah? Pape is not a rocket scientist. Maybe he's a rocket scientist when it comes to science. But I can learn better than him, I'm going to see this. But you want to talk about a Jew who a mitzvah is a mitzvah and a davening is a davening? He's never become like the rest of us. He's a Talmud B'ma, he's a sincere yid. That's called hergish, das. Das, it's a certain depth. It's a certain depth, certain emes. So the Alter Rebbe says there's a cause and effect. There's a pro-action and an effect. In other words, there's something you can do about it. Even though there's no doubt that to a great extent, das is the personality. I believe that's true. Some people have pushed more depth than others by nature. They've just made people deeper and shallower. You have people who are grown men and women who are very intelligent and very successful, and they're babies, mamish babies. Okay, they don't play with marbles and with cards. They play with cars and with clothing and with restaurants, but they're children. They've never grown past Nadishkeit for something which is more meaningful. It's possible. And then you have people who are pushing the deeper people. So the Alter Rebbe, but you should know that das is an action that has a reaction. I mean to say it's not mazel. If you're born with greater depth, so you have it. If you're born with lesser depth, so you don't have it. It's something which a person develops through a process. And the process is, in order to care about something, you have to pay attention to it. And you pay attention to it, to the words that the Alter Rebbe uses. Yitka, Machshavtei, Bechezek, Asmod. Right? B'gdula Sein Sein Baruch. V'lei Yasiyah Daite. You put yourself into think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes an emes. It becomes an emes, which is made with a ma'isa. It translates into action. I want to continue my thought. I told you that in my Maimonides Chassidus, the word that they use for das is hergish. But again, I don't mean hergish on a level of emotion, I mean a hergish on a level of depth. Then they use a higher word. In other words, deeper than hargosha, there's another word. And that word is hakara. Hakara, hey, chof, reish, hey. Hakara literally means to recognize. Hakara means that the das becomes so deep that the thing that you developed das for, you recognize that you knew it before you knew it. In other words, ultimately the Eibush is in the neshama. But that's called the subconscious. Consciously you have to develop a relationship with the Eibush. So the first stage of das is called hargosha. In other words, the Eibush is foreign from you. He's separate from you. And through effort you develop a feel. Deeper than hargosha is hakara. Hakara means I not only feel the Eibush, that I come to connect to the Eibush in such a way where he's familiar to me. In other words, we're really one of the first place. We became separated and we're becoming rejoined. It's a higher level of das. And then even higher than hakara, another word which is used, is called hisamtus. The shadish the word is emes. Hey, tov, aleph, men, tov, vav, tov. Hisamtut. That's three sofs, three tofs. Hisamtus. Hisamtus means that the Eibush becomes my emes. And emes is serious geshet. And there's different madreges. The lower level of das is hergish, Afunz Gizag about it. A higher level of das is hakara, and even higher than hakara is hisamtus. And then there's a lot more. The sugi gets very, very involved. Now I made a pledge that next week we're going to start Perek Daled, and I'm determined to keep it. So now I'm going to do a filibuster. I'm going to say now a bunch of words very fast that should take a whole class, but I don't want to spend another class. Yedazach hatagvu. You must understand the emek hadava. What's really going on here. When you talk about koyach hadas, you're talking about the integrity of a person. You're talking about the integrity of a human being, really. The spirit of you, the soul of you. And in today's nutty world, in today's crazy world, there's b'chal debate that exists altogether. You know, if a human being is an evolved primate, if he's an animal that's just done a little better, it's come out of the forest and moved onto the fields and started to pick trees, so then none of this is emes. You have to believe in the Eibishter, you have to believe in the Neshama, and you have to believe in Selam Elokim. That a human being is in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are an expression of God. Every human being, Jew and non-Jew, is an expression of Ein Seif. And that's the basis for the whole idea of an internal system of integrity. Integrity is not only a social contract, like they like to call it. It's a atzmi, as they can say. From inside me, there's a right and a wrong. There's an emes and a shef. So the das is a very deep koyach. It's a very deep koyach. It's very deep. It's deeper than the other koyach. In Kabbalah, it's written, Kisha hadas nimna eina kesed nimna. Like everybody knows kesed. Kesed is higher than a shalshlus. Kesed is a safe. When you count das, you don't count kesed because das takes the place of kesed and is even deeper than kesed. Das, which is a koyach, which means in literally a tool, in the nefesh ha'adam is not only infinite like kesed is, it's come from pnimis ha'kesed, from atik. Das is very, very deep. It's higher even than kesed. That's one side of das. There's another side of das, which is very, very important. And the other side of das, the das is a koyach, which means that it's a tool, which means that it's at my disposal. And this is really probably, if you want to understand what Chabad Hasidus is after, ultimately it's this. We are not only in control of our actions, we're in control of our conscience. We're in control of our maturity and our depth. Because das is a tool. You know what a tool means? You have a hammer, yeah. You open up your toolbox, you take out the hammer and you knock in a nail. You open your toolbox, take a wrench, you fix a pipe. You open up your toolbox, take out pliers and you fix a wire. Who's stopping you? Nobody, it's yours. It's your tools, it's just in your box. It's closed, you open, you take it out, you use it. Nobody says, excuse me, you can't use it on Sunday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. It's yours. Das is a koyach like a screwdriver is a koyach. Just like you own a screwdriver, and it's entirely in your free will to take this tool out of the box and use it to tighten a loose screw. It's equally in your free power to take the tool of das out of the toolbox and to engage, to develop a connection to the Eibishter. That's the Chiddush. It's not magic, it's not a miracle, and it's not personality, it's choice. Das is a koyach. In other words, as on the one hand, das is incredibly deep, take emes, but on the other hand, it's called a koyach. It's not part of the makifim of the nefesh. Can you control your will? Your will comes from your subconscious. You have no control over your will. It either comes or doesn't come. Why? Because your will controls you. You don't control your will. Will comes from higher than your awareness. It comes from your neshama. It comes from your pnimius. Das is very deep. And it's a tool. It's a combination of opposites. Das is one of the deepest things that a human being possesses, even deeper than any of the makifa. But it's given to us in such a way that I'm a balabayas over it. There's discussions in Hasidus, in Samach Vov, where he talks about higher levels of das. Higher levels of das can not only engage your mind and your Rebbe Rashab writes in a mind that a person has gotten das stimor, das which is in the rotzen of the nefesh, that can will a person, that can das a person into changing not only his mind and his heart, but his soul. There's a discussion in Samach and it's in other places in Hasidus as well, where the Rebbe Rashab says there's a higher kind of das that not only takes the ideas that I understand in my brain and I feel in my heart and I make them personal. There's a koyach hadas which can force your neshama to want something it doesn't want. And I said neshama. That can will your neshama, that can create a will in the nefesh where the will doesn't exist. In other words, das is an incredibly powerful tool. It's an incredibly deep tool. It's also a very high tool. There's a lot of madreigis of das. And ve'ela al kulana, more important than all of these, is that das belongs to the conscious human being. The tool of das is an unbelievable tool if we choose to exercise it. And the beginning of the tool of das is the effort that the Rebbe describes. Now the Rebbe in Tanya doesn't speak about these higher madreigis of das. And I'm not coming back next week and talking about it because I decided that I'm not. Yeah, but I'm just sharing with you that in my Morich Sidis they speak about das Tachten and das Elyon, not just Lamaila, but in Nefesh Ha'adam. Right? What's the das Tachten and das Elyon? This is for the Kabbalists. Das Tachten is between Mechen and Midas. Das Elyon is either between Chochmah and Bina or between Kesed and Chochmah. There's a das which gives you a mastery over your subconscious. You can force your subconscious. Subconscious is subconscious. You have no control over it. Das is strong enough. I forgot the lashon of my mother. You can create a will where the no will exists, which is achidah she'ein kameyu, because will is not part of what we do. Will is part of what we are. It's a basic constitution. It's a basic nehus, a basic nature, a basic substance, and das can change it. And that's a tool. So the Alter Rebbe donates 9 whole lines are dedicated to das. And just for the record, for those who care, das reappears in Tanya in the beginning of chapter 42, Perek Mem Beis. And when you look over there, you have additional oisias, more oisias than you have over here. And then you also have das in the Gersa Kedesh Siman Tesvov. And it could be in other places. Look in the index. Look in the Tanya has a very good index made by the Lubavitcher Rebbe himself. And you can see where Tanya discusses das. You have it both my mother see this. But in addition to all the other incredible things about das, about how deepening it is, it makes a person deeper. The other side of that coin is it's a koyach. The Eibush took the etzem haneshama, the infinite neshama, and he packaged it in a tool which is ours to use by our choice alone. But it requires work, and the work are the words that the Alter Rebbe described here. Mekasher daite bekesher amad v'chazak me'ed v'yitva machshavte v'chezek b'gdol since baruch of eine mesiach daite. Right? Then it says yekasher daite v'yitva machshavte v'chezek of asmad. These words are describing how you use this tool. Not an easy thing to discuss, certainly not an easy thing to do, but something very important and real. Okay, so we're going to take now a break. I believe Ned that next Sunday we will learn, if I'll be here, we'll learn Perek Daled the Mitzvah Hashem. And in a minute or two, we're going to learn my Chassidus. Okay, thank you all for coming.